Historically, no. Historically, though, every ethnicity went through something. Native Americans went through the most because they are the most oppressed on this landmass. Mexicans went through their own racism, right? Asians that went through their own forms of racism, getting unalived and all kinds of shit. But you would know that if you knew other ethnic cultures' histories, right? So using historical accounts in 2026, were you there? Did you go through that shit? Is what I'm saying. In 2026, you have the structure to do these things.
It's like she didn't graduate high school. Does she have a diploma?
You choose not to. Like I said, nobody's saying anything negative about it. Y'all, that's just y'all's choice. You have the ability to have the structure. You just don't do it. In 2026, what is oppressing you in 2026? Tell me. I would like to know. How are you in 2026 being oppressed? In the same exact ways that were back in the day.
Police brutality, redlining, job inequality, mass incarceration. That's 4 systemic issues Black people are still facing in 2026, just off the top of my head. They are all well-documented, ongoing patterns. So when you speak as if these realities don't exist, it raises a serious question: what exactly are you basing your perspective on? 300,000 Black women were laid off in the job sector due to what Trump has done. What the hell is Ray talking about?
Because yes, y'all can always lean on history and, oh, look, if we could, then we would have. And y'all did. Y'all did. And yes, they fucked it up. That's part of the fight, though. If you're claiming you're fighting against the oppression, you're gonna have to get up, dust yourself off, and do it again. That's part of that. Because the system is built against the poor. And guess who the poor are? So, sitting here in 2026, trying to bring up history when I'm talking about today in 2026, not the 1940s, not the 1800s. In 2026, this is the context, this is the timeline. Stay focused on it. You have the ability to do so. So, what is stopping you? Oh, y'all, your own community. But y'all aren't ready to have that conversation amongst each other that much as should be. There's a want and a need to constantly blame history and everyone else in regards to anything as to why y'all feel y'all haven't progressed.
I have a question for Ray. I'm curious to know why she hasn't progressed. She's 40 and still trying to find a permanent address. What's holding you back, Ray? No, in all seriousness. There are systems in place that limit upward mobility, and that system is white supremacy. Race was not created randomly, it was constructed with a purpose. That purpose was to create a hierarchy that benefits the people who defined it. That's why we continue to see disparities across workforce opportunities, healthcare access, media representation, the judicial system. These disparities didn't happen by accident. They are the result of long-standing structural barriers. Hundreds of years have passed, and people of color are still disproportionately at the bottom across these systems. That is not coincidence, it's done by design. And this is why I always warn against that level of ignorance, because it's the thing that's going to lead to your downfall.
Instead of looking at self. Saying that Native Americans can dabble in white supremacy is weird as fuck. And that's a weird thing to say, seeing as how if you knew anything about what's happening with Native Americans past or the present, that's awkward as fuck. That shows how you don't really, there's no real education there in regards to Native American current events or history. So claiming that the most oppressed people can dabble in white supremacy, but black people can't. When isn't that what the civil rights was for? So y'all can sit in their restaurants and drink out of their fountains. And
I find it highly disturbing how she doesn't see how she's contradicting herself. If that's what black people were fighting for during the civil rights era, then wouldn't that mean everyone else who helped were fighting for the exact same thing?
Work alongside with them? Because if it was for equality, isn't that the same shit? Like, I'm trying to understand why every time we have this conversation, there's always history that's brought up instead of focusing on the current times. Right? It's always but back in the day, but slavery, but Black Wall Street. Yes, every community had its atrocities in history. Yeah, that's kind of how history worked. But then in 2026, you see, because they continue to persevere, they continue to rebuild, they continue to go about it a different way, they continue to learn the loopholes of the law, and learn how the system works to make it work for them, so that way they can get to where they need to, or at least close to where they need to.
Moving along.
So I got a quick question. For the members of the black congregation who think that black people can't be racist because racism is a systemic structure and all this other shit, when racism is its own definition, and then you have different tiers of racism, which includes systemic racism. But the base definition of racism has nothing to do with system.
But it does. It's very clear to me that Ray has no clue what the suffix ISM in racism means. Let me help you out, Ray. The ism refers to a system, a structured practice, or an ideology. So racism is not about individual prejudice, it is a system. The concept of race itself was built within a hierarchy that prioritizes whiteness. That's why racism operates at a systemic level, not just through isolated actions. The belief in white superiority is taught and tied to systemic infrastructure that impacts your daily lives. And this is also why people of color can participate in or reinforce harmful aspects of that system without actually benefiting from it. We see that play out in different ways, including political choices that ultimately reinforce the same structures. And this is why white people cannot experience racism, because they cannot be harmed by a concept that was created for their benefit. Did it not occur to you that every landmass that was touched by colonialism carries the same concept of race and white superiority?
Is calling ICE on people you deem immigrants, is that not participating in systemic racism? Like, you know how, like, when white people call the cops on black people because, and then, but y'all threatening ICE, calling ICE. They're like, we see the videos everywhere, right? Like, I literally just got through seeing a video. It's like every day I see a video of somebody from the black community talking shit to somebody who they deem is an illegal immigrant, right? And they're usually Spanish speaking. That's racism, and are brown. So racism, right? And then you bring the system into it by threatening with ICE, right? Or actually calling ICE, right? So you would then be participating in systemic racism, which means you would then be benefiting from systemic racism. But if systemic racism is what is oppressing you, how are you capable of participating in it? Just a question.
So we've also established that she doesn't understand what systemic racism means either. People of color can participate in or reinforce aspects of these systems, even if they don't benefit from them. That's part of how systems sustain themselves, through normalization and repetition. But reinforcing a system is not the same as having power within it. Now I had to throw this one in because it tickled me greatly.
All right. But everybody came out of Africa, right? That's the theory. All human life started in Africa. But Africans, Europeans, and Asians, which we're also assumed to be, they all have a plethora of a genetic makeup, right? It's not a very unique genetic makeup, right? How do Native Americans have a unique genetic makeup when the African people do not have a unique genetic makeup? If we came from them, wouldn't our genetic makeup be as, you know what I'm saying, as theirs? Like, wouldn't it be as eclectic as theirs? No, it wouldn't. Because science, like, the genes mutated. Well, first of all, the species that left Africa is not the same species that we are, right? So how would that even clock? How would you even clock that migration?
It was at this point that I knew Ray was a crazy person, because what is she talking about? I find it disturbing that she thought she was making sense. If Native Americans aren't the same species as everyone else, then what are they? At this point, Ray is going on the sick and shut in list. When you see her, block her, mute her, don't let this crazy lady in your space. We will remember her fondly.
Like reggaeton, like salsa, like merengue. Black people create these cultures, but it constantly gets swallowed up by the Latino underdog.
Something I think needs to be translated more when it comes to talking about this topic is trying to get people in the U.S. to understand they have a gringo mindset, which is something that this panel and the people of that guy have. To the point where they're just being anti-Latino, even though they are Latino, even though they are mestizos to a large extent. And this is the difference between Latin America and the United States. And that is, people in Latin America are actually mixed, and they have in common their mixture. And the reason this exists is because the CASA system. And the CASA system existing the way it did is the reason why people identify with their nation. Because here I am defending the CASA system. The CASA system, for its time, was a very progressive system.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. This guy here is clearly not from Latin America, and yet he speaks on Latin America with so much certainty. The concept of race comes from the Iberian Peninsula, which is where the caste system actually comes from. This is where the idea of blackness being worthless initially came from. The caste system wasn't about unity or making anyone else equal to whiteness. In fact, it actually defeats the entire point of race being created in the first place. Whiteness does not work well with others. It was a concept created for systemic advantages and exploitation. White people did not come to the Americas to build equal societies with indigenous and African people. The historical record shows systems of displacement, exploitation, and hierarchy. Which is why I always say that there is no such thing as white allies, because you can't be a colonizer and a friend. You can't have your foot on my throat while selling me a solution to the problem.
And that it forced white people or the Spanish to actually recognize mixed people as someone more equal to them than the system that you see in America with the Anglo English colonies. Because in those places, the one drop rule exists.
This is false. The United States didn't develop in isolation. Many of its racial and class structures were influenced by earlier European systems, including those established by Spanish and Portuguese colonial rule. Across the Americas, different colonial powers implemented variations of racial hierarchy, but the underlying logic was similar: stratification based on race and ancestry.
In Latin America, it doesn't. And that's why eventually you have a high amount of people who are just mestizo that all have way more in common with each other than people like in America, where you have people who are like segregated, not just like by government enforcement, but also by like culture, by culture. So in Latin America, the divide is more based on class than it is actually on what you would call like purely color. Okay, there is colorism. I'm not going to deny that. No one's going to deny that. But like, it's not the same thing as what's going on in the U.S. And that's why I have an issue with these, what they would consider themselves, what they call themselves like Black Americans, because they are using their gringo mindset of being black and race to try to basically gaslight people in Latin America into believing stuff that is like just anti-Latino. Let's be honest, okay? Why would you ever say that reggaeton is black culture?
Because reggaeton is black culture. It originated in Panama, heavily influenced by Afro-Caribbean communities and hip-hop, and was later popularized in Puerto Rico. So when people try to detach reggaeton from its black cultural roots, it reflects a broader pattern where black and indigenous contributions get minimized or reassigned to the white supremacist structure. It's painstakingly obvious that this guy has never been to Latin America and did not grow up in the culture. These talking points come from Fidel Stryker and his Pretendian Brigade. When people speak over communities they're not part of, while downplaying or rewriting the origins of culture and history, it reinforces the same patterns that allowed those erasures to happen in the first place. That's why accuracy matters. That's why cultural and historical context matters. Because without it, misinformation spreads, and those same hierarchies continue to be reinforced, even if unintentionally.